I'm standing in the boardroom of Morrison Industries, watching my brother David's face drain of color as he realizes who his new CEO is. The same sister he mocked for dropping out of college. The same sister he called worthless at every family gathering for the past 12 years. Sarah, his voice cracks like he's seeing a ghost. What are you doing here? I adjust my Hermes blazer and place the acquisition documents on the mahogany table. I'm here to discuss the terms of your employment, David, or should I say, your termination. The room falls silent. My cousin Jake, who used to call me the family failure, is gripping his coffee cup so tight I think it might shatter. My Aunt Linda, who once told me I'd end up flipping burgers forever, looks like she's about to faint. This has to be some kind of joke, David stammers. You can't be serious. You dropped out of community college. You couldn't even handle basic math. I smile, the kind of smile that's taken me years to perfect. Cold, confident, untouchable. Funny thing about basic math, David, I've gotten pretty good at it. Good enough to calculate exactly how much your department has been embezzling from company funds. Good enough to buy out your pathetic little business with my lunch money. I open my laptop and turn it toward them. The screen shows their shocked faces reflected back at them, but behind that reflection, they can see the bank transfer. $47 million, completed this morning. Welcome to your worst nightmare, it's me. Comment below, what's the most savage comeback you've ever delivered? I want to hear your stories. Let me take you back to where this all started. 12 years ago, I was Sarah Mitchell, a 22-year-old community college student working 3 jobs just to pay for textbooks and ramen noodles. I lived in a studio apartment with walls so thin I could hear my neighbors' entire phone conversations, and my car was a 1998 Honda Civic with a door that only opened from the inside. But I had dreams. God, did I have dreams. I was studying business administration, barely scraping by with C's and D's because I was working 60 hours a week just to survive. My family? They weren't just unsupportive, they were downright cruel about it. Sarah's trying to get her little degree again, my brother David would announce at every Sunday dinner, making air quotes around degree, like it was the most ridiculous concept in the world. David was 2 years older than me and worked as a regional manager at Morrison Industries, a mid-sized manufacturing company. He made decent money and never let anyone forget it. At least someone in this family has their priorities straight, my Aunt Linda would chime in, patting David's shoulder. Linda was my father's sister, and she'd married rich young. She spent her days at country clubs and her evenings judging everyone else's life choices. Education is fine and all, but some people just aren't cut out for it. My cousin Jake, Linda's son, was the worst of all. He'd graduated from a state university with his father's connections and landed a cushy job at Morrison Industries too, coincidentally, the same company where David worked. Jake loved to remind me that his starting salary was more than I made in 6 months. Face it, Sarah, Jake would say with that smug grin that made me want to throw something. College isn't for everyone. Maybe you should focus on learning a trade. I hear McDonald's has great management training programs. The laughter that followed still echoes in my nightmares. My parents, they were worse than silent, they were enablers. Mom would just shrug and say, well, honey, maybe they have a point. School is expensive and you're struggling so much. Dad would nod along, adding, maybe you should consider something more realistic. The breaking point came during my 3rd semester. I was taking a particularly brutal accounting class, and I was failing. Not because I couldn't understand the material, but because I was working double shifts at 2 different restaurants and a weekend cleaning job just to keep the lights on. I hadn't slept more than 4 hours a night in weeks. I remember sitting in that accounting classroom, staring at a test I knew I was going to fail when my phone buzzed. It was a text from my manager at the diner. Need you to cover Sarah's shift tonight. Emergency, double pay. I looked around the classroom at my classmates. Kids whose biggest worry was what party to attend on Friday night. Kids whose parents paid their tuition and rent and grocery bills. Kids who could dedicate their full attention to studying while I was calculating whether I could afford both textbooks and electricity that month. That's when I made the decision that would change everything. I walked out of that classroom and I never went back. The family reaction was immediate and brutal. David called me that same evening, laughing so hard he could barely speak. I heard you finally came to your senses and quit school. About time you stopped embarrassing yourself. At the next family gathering, it was open season on Sarah. Jake had prepared what he called helpful career suggestions, a printed list that included gas station attendant, fast food worker, and professional failure. Linda brought it up at least 15 times during dinner, each time with a different variation of, I always knew Sarah wasn't college material. The thing about education, my father said, cutting into his roast beef like he was delivering the wisdom of the ages, is that it's not for everyone. Some people are just meant to be workers, not thinkers. But the comment that broke me, really broke me, came from my mother. I love you, honey, she said as she walked me to my car that night, but maybe it's time to accept that this family has its limits. David and Jake, they're the success stories. You, well, you're going to have to find your own path, a different kind of path. I sat in my beat-up Honda Civic in their driveway and cried for 20 minutes. Not sad tears, angry tears, furious tears. The kind of tears that come from a place so deep you don't even know it exists until someone pushes you there. That night, I made 3 promises to myself. First, I would never let anyone make me feel small again. Second, I would become successful enough to buy and sell every single one of them. Third, I would make sure they knew it was me when I did. I had no idea how I was going to keep those promises. I just knew I would. What would you do if your own family gave up on your dreams? Comment your city and let me know. I read every single one. The worst part wasn't even the initial mockery. It was how they doubled down on it, year after year, like it was some kind of family tradition to remind me of my failure. Every holiday became a performance. Every birthday, every wedding, every funeral, someone would find a way to work in a comment about how I'd given up on education, or how I was finally learning to be realistic about my limitations. 3 years after I dropped out, I was working as a server at an upscale restaurant downtown. The pay was decent, the tips were good, and I was starting to save a little money for the first time in my life. I thought maybe, just maybe, I was finding some stability. That's when David decided to bring his entire Morrison Industries management team to my restaurant for their quarterly celebration dinner. I didn't know they were coming. I was assigned to their table like any other table, and I walked over with my notepad and my practiced smile, ready to take their drink orders. Oh my God, David's voice cut through the restaurant noise like a knife. Sarah, you're still here. The entire table turned to look at me. 12 people in expensive suits, all suddenly focused on the family failure in her black server's uniform. David, I said quietly, trying to maintain some dignity. I didn't know you were dining here tonight. This is perfect, Jake chimed in from across the table. He was sitting next to a woman I didn't recognize, probably his latest girlfriend. Guys, this is my cousin Sarah, the one I was telling you about who tried to go to college but couldn't hack it. The laughter was polite but pointed. These people didn't know me, but they were laughing anyway because that's what you do when the boss makes a joke. Sarah's found her calling though, David continued, gesturing grandly at my uniform. Service industry. It's honest work, right, Sarah? Nothing wrong with knowing your place. I should have walked away. I should have asked my manager to reassign the table. I should have done anything except what I actually did. Instead, I tried to defend myself. Actually, I'm working on some entrepreneurial projects, I said, my voice smaller than I wanted it to be. This is just temporary while I build something bigger. The silence that followed was worse than the laughter. Jake exchanged a look with David that I'd seen 1,000 times before, that mixture of pity and superiority that meant they thought I was delusional. Entrepreneurial projects, Jake repeated slowly, like he was explaining something to a child. Sarah, sweetie, you couldn't handle community college accounting. What kind of entrepreneurial projects could you possibly be working on? David leaned back in his chair, clearly enjoying himself. Let me guess, you're going to start your own restaurant? Maybe a food truck? Very ambitious for someone who couldn't pass basic math. The woman next to Jake, his girlfriend or wife or whatever, decided to join in. Oh, how cute. It's like when my little niece says she wants to be a princess when she grows up. That's when I snapped. You know what? I said, my voice getting stronger despite my shaking hands. In 5 years, I'm going to be successful enough to buy your entire company. In 10 years, I'm going to be your boss. And when that happens, I'm going to remember every single word you said tonight. The laughter that followed was the loudest yet. David was practically crying with amusement. Jake was slapping the table. Even some of the other diners were turning to look at the commotion. Sarah, David said when he could finally breathe again, I love you, I really do. But you just threatened to buy Morrison Industries. Do you have any idea what that company is worth? We're talking about a $50 million operation. You can't even afford community college tuition. She's going to be our boss, Jake added, wiping tears from his eyes. Did everyone hear that? Sarah, the college dropout, is going to be our boss. The woman next to Jake pulled out her phone. I have to record this. This is too good. I realized, standing there in my server's uniform, while a table full of people in $1,000 suits laughed at my dreams, that this was my rock bottom moment. This was the moment I would either break completely or find out what I was really made of. I made my choice. You know what the difference is between me and all of you? I said, loud enough that the entire restaurant could hear. You think your current success is permanent. You think your positions are secure. You think the world owes you something because you have nice jobs and nice clothes and nice cars. I leaned over the table, looking David straight in the eyes. But I'm hungry, I'm desperate, I'm angry, and I have absolutely nothing left to lose. Do you know how dangerous that makes me? I straightened up and tore the order pad I'd been holding in half, letting the pieces fall on their table like confetti. I quit, I announced, loud enough that the entire restaurant could hear. And David, Jake, I want you to remember this moment, because the next time you see me, I'm going to own you. I walked out of that restaurant and never looked back. But as I pushed through the doors, I could still hear the laughter following me into the night. That laughter became my fuel. Rate this level of humiliation 110. Have you ever had a moment where you had to choose between breaking or fighting back? The thing about declaring war on your entire family is that you have to be prepared to fight it alone. And for the first 2 years after that restaurant incident, I was completely, utterly alone. I moved out of my studio apartment and into something even smaller, a converted garage that I rented for $400 a month from an elderly woman named Mrs. Chen. It had no kitchen, just a hot plate and a mini fridge. The bathroom was shared with 3 other tenants. But it was mine, and more importantly, it was cheap enough that I could save every other penny I earned. I got a job at a 24-hour diner on the bad side of town, working the graveyard shift from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. The tips were terrible, but the base pay was slightly better than my last job, and working nights meant I had my days free to focus on what I was really doing, learning everything I could about business. I couldn't afford to go back to college, so I created my own curriculum. I spent my mornings at the public library, checking out every business book I could find: marketing, finance, operations, supply chain management. I read biographies of successful entrepreneurs until I could recite them from memory. But reading wasn't enough. I needed real experience. That's when I met Marcus Rodriguez. Marcus was a regular at the diner, a 45-year-old construction contractor who came in every morning at 6 a.m. sharp for coffee and eggs over easy. He always sat at the same corner booth, always paid with exact change, and always tipped exactly 20%. After 3 months of serving him the same breakfast, I finally worked up the courage to ask him about his business. You want to know about construction? He asked, raising an eyebrow. Most people think it's all manual labor and hard hats. I want to know about running a business, I corrected. You employ 12 people. You've been operating for 15 years. You must be doing something right. Marcus studied me for a long moment. You're the girl who's always reading those business books, aren't you? I see you in the corner booth during your breaks. Guilty as charged. Why construction? Why not restaurants? You already know the industry. I told him the truth, because construction is project-based. Every job has a clear beginning, middle, and end. Every client has specific needs that require custom solutions. It's problem-solving with tangible results, and the profit margins, if managed correctly, are substantial. Marcus laughed, not the cruel laughter I'd gotten used to from my family, but genuine amusement. You've been doing your homework. Tell you what, kid. I need someone to help me with my books and maybe handle some customer service. The pay isn't much, but you'd learn the business from the ground up. Interested? I was so interested I almost quit the diner on the spot. Instead, I negotiated to work for Marcus during the day and keep my night job at the diner. For 8 months, I worked 16-hour days, learning everything Marcus could teach me about running a construction business. That's when I discovered something that would change everything. Marcus was terrible at bidding jobs. He was an excellent contractor. His work was quality, his crew was reliable, and his customers loved him. But he consistently underbid projects by 15–20%, eating into his profits and sometimes even losing money on jobs. Marcus, I said one afternoon, as we reviewed the numbers for a kitchen renovation project, you're charging $12,000 for a job that should cost $15,000. You're basically paying them to let you work. That's how you get customers, he shrugged. Competitive pricing. That's how you go bankrupt, I corrected. You're not competing on price, you're subsidizing their renovations with your own money. I spent the next 2 weeks developing a proper bidding system for Marcus, factoring in materials, labor, overhead, and a reasonable profit margin. When he started using my system, his profits increased by 30% almost immediately. That's when I had my first real business insight. There were probably hundreds of small contractors making the same mistakes Marcus had been making. If I could develop a consulting service to help them optimize their bidding and operations, I could build something significant. But I needed capital to start a consulting business, and I needed credibility. That meant I had to prove my system worked on a larger scale. I convinced Marcus to let me take on a bigger role in his business, essentially becoming his operations manager while continuing to work nights at the diner. Within 6 months, I'd increased his annual revenue by 40% and his profit margin by 35%. Word started to spread in the local construction community. Other contractors began asking Marcus how he'd turned his business around so dramatically. A few of them approached me directly about helping them. That's when I made my first $5,000 consulting fee, helping a roofing contractor reorganize his entire operation. But success, I learned, has a way of attracting attention, including the wrong kind of attention. The first person to reach out was my mother. "Sarah, honey," she said when she called me one evening, "I've been hearing some interesting things about you. Mrs. Patterson's son works in construction, and he mentioned that you're doing some kind of business consulting now." I could hear the carefully manufactured interest in her voice, the same tone she used when she was fishing for gossip to share at family gatherings. "I'm helping a few contractors optimize their operations," I said carefully. "That's wonderful, sweetheart. You know, your father and I always knew you'd find your way eventually. We're so proud of you for finally finding something you're good at." Finally finding something I'm good at. Like everything before this had been me flailing around randomly until I stumbled into success by accident. Thanks, Mom. You should come to David's birthday party next week. The whole family will be there. It would be so nice for everyone to hear about your little business." My little business. There it was again, the subtle diminishment disguised as support. "I'll think about it," I lied. But Mom wasn't done. "Oh, and Sarah, I mentioned to Linda that you're doing well, and she had such a great idea. Jake is looking to do some work on his house. Maybe you could connect him with one of your contractor friends? You know, help family when you can." I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Jake wanted to use my connections now that they might be valuable, but I guarantee he wasn't going to pay my consulting fees or treat me with any more respect than he had at the restaurant. "I'll see what I can do," I said, knowing I wouldn't. The call with David came 2 days later. "Sarah," his voice was aggressively cheerful, like we'd been best friends our whole lives instead of him spending years mocking me. "Mom told me about your consulting thing. That's really great, sis, really great." Thanks, David." "Listen, I've been thinking. Morrison Industries works with a lot of contractors for our facility maintenance and expansion projects. Maybe there's some way we could work together? You know, keep it in the family." I almost laughed. Keep it in the family. The same family that had spent years telling me I'd never amount to anything. What did you have in mind? I asked, curious to see how far he'd take this. Well, maybe you could recommend some of your contractor contacts for our projects. And if they get hired, maybe we could work out some kind of referral arrangement. Everyone wins, right? A referral arrangement. He wanted me to hand over my business contacts so he could take credit for bringing them to Morrison Industries, probably earning himself some kind of bonus or recognition in the process. I'd have to think about it, I said. Of course, of course. But Sarah, between you and me, this could be really good for your little consulting business. Morrison Industries has serious purchasing power. We could really help you grow. Your little consulting business. Your little business. Everyone kept calling it little, like they were patting a child on the head for finger painting. The conversation with Jake was even more transparent. Sarah, cousin? He called me 3 days later, using a nickname he'd never used in his life. I heard through the family grapevine that you're killing it in the business world. Good for you. Thanks, Jake. Listen, I'm renovating my kitchen, and I need a reliable contractor. I was hoping you might know someone good, someone who could give me a family discount. A family discount? From the same cousin who used to mock me for not being able to afford textbooks. I might know someone, I said carefully. Perfect, and hey, if this goes well, maybe you and I should talk about some bigger opportunities. I've got my finger on the pulse of some major development projects coming up in the city. Could be a chance for you to really expand your operation. Could be a chance for you to really expand your operation. Like I was some kind of junior partner, he was generously considering for his team. What kind of development projects? I asked. Well, I can't say too much. You understand? Confidentiality and all that. But Morrison Industries is looking at some major facility expansions over the next 2 years. We're talking about projects in the $10-15 million range. If you play your cards right, there could be some serious opportunities for your consulting business. If I play my cards right, meaning if I was properly grateful and subservient to Jake's magnanimous offer to maybe throw me some scraps from Morrison Industries' table. But here's what Jake didn't know. I'd already been researching Morrison Industries extensively. I knew about their expansion plans because I'd been tracking their permit applications and zoning requests. I knew their current contractors were overcharging them by an average of 22%. I knew their project management was inefficient and their quality control was inconsistent. Most importantly, I knew that Morrison Industries was vulnerable. Over the next 3 months, as my consulting business continued to grow, I kept getting these calls from family members. Everyone suddenly wanted to be supportive. Everyone had ideas for how they could help me succeed. Everyone was so proud of how far I'd come. But underneath, every conversation was the same assumption: that I should be grateful for their attention, that my success was somehow dependent on their approval, that I was still the same person who had walked out of that community college classroom years earlier. They had no idea what I was really building. They had no idea that their little pat-on-the-head consulting business was generating 6 figures in annual revenue. They had no idea that I'd been using every piece of information they casually shared about Morrison Industries to develop a comprehensive acquisition strategy. And they had no idea that every single one of their condescending phone calls was just making me more determined to destroy them. But I wasn't ready yet. I needed more capital, more credibility, and more time. So I played along. I was polite on the phone. I attended David's birthday party and smiled while everyone congratulated me on my little business. I even gave Jake a referral to one of my contractors, at full price, not the family discount he'd expected. And all the while, I was planning their downfall. The only person who saw through my performance was Marcus. "You're up to something," he said one afternoon as we reviewed his quarterly numbers. "You've got that look." "And what look?" "The same look you had when you figured out I was underbidding jobs, like you've solved a puzzle nobody else knows exists." I smiled. Marcus had taught me everything about running a construction business, but more importantly, He'd taught me that sometimes the best revenge is simply being better than everyone who doubted you. I'm not up to anything, I said. I'm just building something bigger than they think I can build. They being your family. They being everyone who ever told me to know my place. Marcus nodded slowly. Just remember, kid, success is the best revenge, but only if you don't lose yourself getting it. I appreciated the advice, but Marcus didn't understand what my family had put me through. He'd never been laughed at by people who were supposed to love him. He'd never had his dreams dismissed as impossible by the people whose approval he'd craved most. Success wasn't going to be enough. I wanted them to know they'd been wrong. I wanted them to understand exactly what they'd underestimated. I wanted them to remember every cruel word they'd ever said to me. What's the worst thing a family member has ever said to you? Sometimes the people closest to us cut the deepest. Comment below. By year 7 of my little business, I was managing a portfolio of 47 construction contractors across 3 states, had launched a software platform for project management and bidding optimization, and was pulling in $2.3 million in annual revenue. But my family still thought I was the same girl who'd failed out of community college. That was exactly how I wanted it. I'd learned to compartmentalize my life completely. When I attended family gatherings, which I did religiously, because intelligence gathering is crucial for any successful operation, I wore modest clothes, drove my old Honda Civic, and talked about my business like it was still a small-time consulting gig helping a few local contractors. "How's the little business going, honey?" My Aunt Linda would ask at every gathering, and I'd smile and say, "Oh, keeping busy with a few clients." Meanwhile, I was living in a penthouse downtown, driving a Tesla Model S, and had just closed my largest consulting contract ever. A $500,000 project optimizing supply chain operations for a major regional developer. But none of that mattered compared to what I'd been working on in secret for the past 3 years. Morrison Industries was dying, and they didn't even know it. Their main competitors had modernized their operations, automated their processes, and expanded into new markets, while Morrison Industries continued operating like it was still 1985. Their profit margins were shrinking every quarter. Their client retention rate was dropping. Their employee turnover was increasing. Most critically, they were over-leveraged on a series of expansion projects that were bleeding money. I knew all of this because I'd spent 2 years systematically gathering intelligence. I'd consulted for 3 of their competitors and had access to market analysis that Morrison Industries couldn't afford. I'd reviewed their public financial filings going back 10 years. I'd even dated one of their former accountants who'd given me insights into their internal operations. David and Jake had no idea that their company was 6 months away from either bankruptcy or acquisition. But I did. And I had a plan. It took me another 18 months to arrange the financing, but by year 9 of my consulting business, I had assembled a consortium of investors who were interested in acquiring distressed manufacturing companies. Our fund had $65 million in available capital, and I had convinced them that Morrison Industries was the perfect acquisition target. The best part? The acquisition would be structured as a management buyout, with me as the new CEO. The morning I walked into that Morrison Industries boardroom, I was wearing a Hermes blazer that cost more than David made in a month, and carrying acquisition documents that would make me his boss within 30 days. But I wasn't ready to reveal everything yet. First, I wanted to see how far they'd take their condescension when they thought they held all the power. "Sarah," David said, looking genuinely confused, "what are you doing here? I thought we were meeting with the new ownership group." "You are," I said, placing my briefcase on the conference table. "I represent the acquiring consortium." Jake laughed, that same dismissive laugh I'd been hearing for years. "Sarah, what are you talking about? We're selling to a major investment group. This is serious business. Like tens of millions of dollars serious." 47 million, to be precise, I said calmly, plus assumption of your outstanding debts, which brings the total transaction value to 53 million. The room went quiet. Jake's girlfriend, now his wife, apparently, was staring at me like I'd grown a second head. Sarah, my Aunt Linda said slowly, "Sweetie, I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding. This is a corporate acquisition. You run a little consulting business." Actually, Linda, I run a multi-million-dollar operations optimization firm with 47 contractors under management across 3 states, plus a software platform that's used by over 200 construction companies nationwide. David shook his head. "That's impossible. Mom said you were still doing small-time consulting." "Mom says a lot of things. Most of them are wrong." I opened my laptop and turned it toward them. The screen showed a comprehensive presentation: my company's revenue figures, client testimonials, market analysis, and finally, the acquisition proposal. Morrison Industries, I began, slipping into the presentation voice I'd perfected in boardrooms across the region, is a fundamentally sound company with strong brand recognition and an established client base. However, your operations are inefficient, your technology is outdated, and your expansion strategy has created unsustainable debt levels. Jake was frantically scrolling through the documents. This can't be real. Sarah, you dropped out of community college. You were a waitress." "I was never a waitress, Jake. I was a server at an upscale restaurant where the average check was $200 per table, and I was pulling in $60,000 a year in tips alone. But more importantly, I was learning about customer service, operations management, and how to handle pressure, skills that have served me well in building a business that generated $2.8 million in revenue last year." My Aunt Linda looked like she was having trouble processing this information. "But Sarah, you live in that tiny apartment and drive that old car." "I live in a 3,000 square foot penthouse downtown and drive a Tesla Model S. I kept the Honda as a backup car. And I dressed down for family gatherings because I wanted to observe how you all behaved when you thought you had something I didn't." The silence that followed was deafening. David was the first to recover. "Okay, let's say this is all true. Let's say you actually have made some money with your consulting business. That doesn't mean you can run a manufacturing company. Morrison Industries is a complex operation with 150 employees and multiple revenue streams. You don't have experience with—" "I've spent the last 3 years studying your company specifically," I interrupted. "I know that your overhead costs are 23% higher than industry standard. I know that your quality control protocols are inconsistent across your 3 facilities. I know that your client acquisition cost has increased 40% over the past 2 years, while your client lifetime value has decreased by 15%. I clicked to the next slide, which showed a detailed organizational chart. I know that Jake's position as Director of Strategic Development is essentially a made-up title that exists because nepotism is easier than admitting he's not qualified for any real management role. I know that your procurement department is still using manual processes that could be automated, saving approximately $400,000 annually. And I know that your current management team has missed every growth target for the past 18 months. Jake's face had gone from confused to red to pale. "How do you know all of this?" "Because unlike you, I didn't get my position handed to me. I earned it by being better, smarter, and more dedicated than everyone around me." I stood up and walked around the table, stopping directly behind David's chair. "Do you remember what you said to me that night at the restaurant 7 years ago? You said I couldn't handle basic math. You said I was delusional for thinking I could ever be successful." David's voice was barely a whisper. "Sarah, You laughed at me, all of you laughed at me. You made jokes about my little business and my realistic limitations. You treated me like I was some kind of charity case who should be grateful for your attention." I moved to stand behind Jake's chair. "And you, cousin, you wanted me to give your contractor friends family discounts. You wanted me to share my business contacts so you could take credit for bringing them to Morrison Industries. You thought my success was dependent on your approval." I returned to my seat and looked around the room at all of them. "But here's what you never understood. Every time you doubted me, every time you dismissed me, every time you made me feel small, you were just giving me more fuel. You were teaching me exactly how not to treat people. You were showing me what kind of person I never wanted to become." The acquisition documents were still spread across the table between us. "So here's what's going to happen," I continued. My consortium is going to acquire Morrison Industries for $47 million. I will become the CEO, effective immediately. The company will undergo a complete operational restructuring based on the efficiency protocols I've developed over the past 9 years. I looked directly at David. Your position as regional manager will be eliminated as part of the restructuring. However, given your experience with the company, I'm prepared to offer you a position as a junior account coordinator, reporting to my new director of client relations. Then I turned to Jake. Your position as director of strategic development will also be eliminated, since it was never a real position to begin with. I'm prepared to offer you a position in our customer service department, where you'll handle inbound client inquiries and complaints. The room was so quiet I could hear the air conditioning humming. You can't be serious, Jake finally managed. I'm absolutely serious. The alternative is unemployment, since these positions won't exist under any other ownership structure. Morrison Industries is being sold one way or another. The previous ownership group withdrew their offer when they discovered the extent of your operational inefficiencies. My group is the only buyer left. Linda found her voice first. Sarah, honey, this is crazy. You can't just buy your family's company out of spite. I'm not buying it out of spite, Linda. I'm buying it because it's a sound investment that fits perfectly into my portfolio. The spite is just a bonus. I closed my laptop and stood up. You have 48 hours to review the offer and make your decision. The current ownership group has already agreed to the sale. You're just employees now, so your opinions about the transaction are irrelevant. But you do get to decide whether you want to work for me or find new jobs elsewhere. I picked up my briefcase and headed for the door. Oh, and one more thing, I said, pausing at the threshold. That night at the restaurant when you all laughed at me, when you said I'd never amount to anything, I want you to know that I've thought about that moment every single day for 7 years. It's been my motivation, my fuel, and my North Star. I smiled at them, the same cold smile I'd perfected in boardrooms across 3 states. So thank you. Thank you for teaching me that the only person I could count on was myself. Thank you for showing me that success isn't about having people believe in you. It's about proving them wrong so completely that they have no choice but to acknowledge what you've become. I opened the door and stepped into the hallway. Welcome to the new Morrison Industries. I'll see you Monday morning at 8 a.m. sharp for the all-hands meeting, where I'll be introducing myself as your new CEO. The door closed behind me with the most satisfying sound I'd ever heard. Rate that power move 110. Have you ever had a moment where you got to prove everyone wrong? Tell me about it in the comments. The 48 hours that followed were the longest of my life, but not because I was nervous about their decision. I knew they didn't have a choice. Morrison Industries was hemorrhaging money, and we were the only buyers left standing. I was anxious because I'd been planning this moment for so long that I wasn't sure reality could live up to the fantasy. It lived up to it. David called me at 6:47 p.m. on the second day, his voice barely above a whisper. Sarah, we need to talk. I'm listening. The junior account coordinator position, what would the salary be? I had to bite my lip to keep from laughing. The junior account coordinator position paid $42,000 a year, less than half of what David was currently making as regional manager, and about $8,000 less than I'd made as a server 7 years earlier. $42,000 annually, plus standard benefits, 2 weeks paid vacation, health insurance with a $2,000 deductible. The silence stretched for almost 30 seconds. And Jake's position. Customer service representative, $38,000 annually, same benefits package. Another long silence. Sarah, those salaries are competitive for entry-level positions, which is what these are. David, you need to understand, you're not being hired based on your previous experience at Morrison Industries. You're being hired despite it. I could hear him breathing heavily on the other end of the line. What about Linda? Will there be any positions for her? I almost laughed out loud. Linda had never worked at Morrison Industries. She'd just been the wife of someone who worked there until her husband retired 5 years earlier. but apparently, she'd been expecting some kind of nepotism appointment in the new organization. Linda doesn't work at Morrison Industries, I said. Why would there be a position for her? She was hoping, with the new ownership structure, maybe some kind of consulting role. David, let me be very clear. I'm running a business, not a charity for underqualified family members. Linda has no relevant experience, no applicable skills, and no role in this organization. I paused for effect. Actually, that's not entirely true. Linda will have one very important role. She gets to watch her son work in customer service while her niece runs the company he used to think he was too good for. The restructuring itself was swift and surgical. I'd spent months planning every detail, and I had an implementation team ready to move the moment the acquisition was finalized. Jake's first day as a customer service representative was everything I'd hoped it would be. I made sure to schedule a routine check-in with the customer service department that morning, which meant Jake got to watch me walk through his workspace in a $3,000 suit while he sat in a cubicle wearing a company polo shirt and a phone headset. "How's the transition going, Jake?" I asked, stopping by his desk. He looked up at me with barely concealed hatred. "Fine." "Excellent, I see you're handling the complaint queue this morning. How many calls have you resolved?" Three. 3 in 4 hours? I made a show of checking my watch. That's concerning. Our target is 12 resolved complaints per day for customer service representatives. Are you having trouble with the system? The system was actually deliberately complex. I designed it that way specifically to make Jake's job more difficult. Every complaint required him to fill out a detailed form, escalate to a supervisor, and follow up with both the client and the internal team responsible for resolution. "The system is fine," Jake said through gritted teeth. "Good to hear. Oh, and Jake, I've scheduled you for additional customer service training next week. We want to make sure all our representatives are meeting our quality standards." I designed the customer service training program myself. It was thorough, condescending, and completely unnecessary for anyone with actual customer service experience. But Jake had never worked customer service in his life. He'd gone straight from college to a management position through nepotism. David's experience was even more satisfying. As a junior account coordinator, his job was essentially to handle the administrative busy work for real account managers. He spent his days updating spreadsheets, scheduling meetings he wasn't important enough to attend, and preparing reports for people who used to be his peers. On his third day, I assigned him to coordinate a client presentation for our biggest account, a $2.3 million project with a client I'd personally landed 6 months earlier. "David," I said, calling him into my office, "I need you to prepare the materials for the Henderson Industries presentation tomorrow." "What kind of materials?" "Standard client presentation package, market analysis, project timeline, cost breakdown, competitive comparison, risk assessment." I handed him a folder. "All the raw data is in here. I need it formatted into a professional presentation by 9 a.m. tomorrow." What I didn't tell David was that this was exactly the kind of presentation I used to prepare for my consulting clients. Except now he was preparing it for me, and the client was worth more than Morrison Industries had generated in profit over the past 3 years. He worked until 2 a.m. to get it done, and when he presented it to me the next morning, it was exactly the kind of mediocre work I'd expected. "David, this market analysis is surface level at best. The competitive comparison is missing 3 major players, and the risk assessment?" I flipped through the pages, shaking my head. "This identifies problems but provides no solutions." "I did the best I could with the time I had," he said defensively. "The time you had? David, this is an 8-hour project at most. What did you spend the other 16 hours on?" The truth was that David had never actually prepared a client presentation in his life. At Morrison Industries, he'd had an assistant who handled most of his administrative work, and his presentations had been mainly reading from templates his assistant prepared. "I'll fix it," he said quietly. "No need, I'll handle the presentation myself. But David, This is exactly the kind of work that determines whether you're successful in this role. I'd recommend taking some time to study how professional presentations are structured. I paused at the door of my office. Also, I'm implementing a new policy for all junior staff. Every project will be peer-reviewed before it's submitted to management. I want you to start attending the weekly training sessions with our other entry-level employees. The weekly training sessions were led by Marcus Rodriguez, who I'd hired as our Director of Operations Training. The same Marcus who taught me everything about running a construction business 7 years earlier was now teaching my brother and cousin the basics of professional work standards. It was poetic justice on a level I could never have imagined. But the most satisfying moment came 3 months after the acquisition. I was hosting a company-wide meeting to announce our quarterly results. Morrison Industries had turned its first profit in 18 months under my leadership, and revenue was up 23% from the previous year. These results, I announced to the assembled staff, represent what's possible when we combine operational efficiency with strategic focus. Every department has contributed to this turnaround. I clicked to a slide showing individual department performance metrics. I want to particularly recognize our facilities management team, our quality control division, and our client relations department for exceeding their targets this quarter. Then I clicked to the next slide. However, we do have some areas that need improvement. Our customer service response time is still below industry standards, and our junior administrative team is consistently missing deadlines on critical projects. I didn't need to name names. Everyone in the room knew exactly who I was talking about. After the meeting, David approached me in the hallway. "Sarah, can we talk?" "Of course." "This isn't working," he said quietly. "The job, the salary, the dynamic, it's not working." "What specifically isn't working, David?" "You know what isn't working." I looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time in months. He'd lost weight. He looked tired. His expensive suits had been replaced by off-the-rack business casual, and his confidence had evaporated entirely. "Are you quitting?" I asked. "I don't know, maybe, I never expected it to be like this." "What did you expect?" I thought maybe we could move past the stuff that happened before. I thought maybe you'd be willing to let me prove myself in a real position." I stared at him for a long moment. "David, do you remember what you said to me the night I walked out of that restaurant?" He looked down at his shoes. "You said I'd never amount to anything. You said I was delusional for thinking I could be successful. You laughed at me in front of your colleagues and made me feel like the smallest person in the world." I stepped closer to him. "This is me proving you wrong. This is what success looks like. And this, you working for me, you struggling to meet basic performance standards, you finally understanding what it feels like to be underestimated and dismissed. This is what accountability looks like." David nodded slowly. "If you want to quit, quit. But don't expect me to make this easy for you just because we share DNA. You had years to treat me like family. Instead, you chose to treat me like a failure." He looked up at me, and for the first time in my adult life, I saw something in his eyes that I'd never seen before: respect. "You really did it," he said quietly. "You actually became everything you said you'd become." "Yes," I replied, "I did. What goes around comes around. Have you ever seen someone get the karma they deserved? Drop a comment below." 2 years after the acquisition, Morrison Industries had become the most profitable company in our sector. We'd expanded into 2 new states, launched 3 innovative product lines, and increased our workforce by 40%. The little manufacturing company that had been hemorrhaging money under the previous management was now generating $15 million in annual profit. I was sitting in my corner office, the same office that had belonged to Morrison Industries' previous CEO, reviewing our quarterly reports when my assistant buzzed me. "Ms. Mitchell, your mother is here to see you." I hadn't spoken to my mother in 6 months, not since she'd called to congratulate me on the acquisition, in a tone that suggested she thought I'd somehow cheated my way into success. "Send her in." Mom walked into my office looking smaller than I remembered. She was wearing her best dress, the navy blue one she saved for special occasions, and clutching her purse like it was a life preserver. "Sarah, honey," she said, her voice uncharacteristically tentative. "Thank you for seeing me." "Of course, please sit down." She perched on the edge of the chair across from my desk, her eyes taking in the expensive furnishings, the wall of awards, the massive windows overlooking the city. "I wanted to talk to you about David," she said finally, "and Jake." I leaned back in my chair and waited. "They're struggling, Sarah, really struggling. David's talking about leaving the state to find work, and Jake is seeing a therapist about his self-esteem issues." I felt a flicker of something, not satisfaction exactly, but a kind of weary vindication. "I'm sorry to hear they're having a difficult time," I said neutrally. "Sarah, I know things got complicated between you and the family. I know we didn't always handle things the right way. Didn't always handle things the right way." That was one way to describe years of systematic emotional abuse disguised as tough love. "But they're family, honey, and family forgives each other, family helps each other." I studied my mother's face, the same face that had looked at me with disappointment every time I'd talked about my dreams, the same face that had nodded along when everyone else dismissed my ambitions as unrealistic. "Mom," I said quietly, "do you remember what you said to me the night I dropped out of college?" She shifted uncomfortably in her chair. "You said I needed to accept that our family had its limits. You said David and Jake were the success stories, and I was going to have to find a different kind of path." "Sarah, a different kind of path," I repeated. "Do you remember what you meant by that?" My mother's eyes filled with tears. "I was wrong. I was so wrong about you, about what you were capable of. I should have believed in you. I should have supported your dreams instead of trying to make you settle for less." It was the apology I'd waited 12 years to hear. But sitting there in my corner office, looking at the woman who'd given birth to me but had never really known me, I realized something surprising. I didn't need it anymore. "I appreciate you saying that, Mom, I really do. So you'll help them, David and Jake? Maybe you could find them better positions here, or help them find jobs somewhere else." I looked out the window at the city skyline, the same city where I'd once lived in a converted garage and worked graveyard shifts at a diner, while my family mocked my ambitions. "Mom, I want you to understand something. David and Jake aren't struggling because I'm being cruel to them. They're struggling because for the first time in their lives, they're being held to the same standards as everyone else." I turned back to face her. "At Morrison Industries, you get promoted based on performance, not on whose nephew you are. You keep your job by meeting targets, not by making jokes about other people's failures. Success is measured by results, not by how effectively you can diminish someone else's dreams." My mother was crying now, silent tears streaming down her cheeks. "They're not bad people, Sarah. They never learned how to work without advantages. They never learned how to succeed on their own merit." "I know they're not bad people, Mom, but they're adults. If they want to succeed, they need to learn the same lessons I learned, that no one owes you anything, that success requires sacrifice, and that the only person responsible for your life is you." I stood up and walked around my desk, sitting in the chair next to my mother instead of across from her. I spent years waiting for this family to believe in me. Years hoping that if I just worked hard enough, if I just proved myself thoroughly enough, you'd all finally see my worth. I took her hand. "But I don't need your validation anymore. I built something extraordinary, and I did it without your support, without your encouragement, and without your belief. I did it because I believed in myself when no one else would." My mother squeezed my hand. "I'm so proud of you, honey. I know I should have said that years ago, but I'm saying it now. I'm so proud of who you've become." "Thank you, that means more to me than you know." We sat in comfortable silence for a moment. "But Mom, I need you to understand. I'm not going to rescue David and Jake from the consequences of their own choices. I'm not going to give them opportunities they haven't earned just because we share DNA." I looked directly into her eyes. "I love them. I love all of you. But love doesn't mean enabling people to avoid growth. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let someone struggle until they find their own strength. My mother nodded slowly. You're right, you're absolutely right. It's hard to watch your children struggle, even when they're adults. I know, but struggling is how people grow. It's how they discover what they're really capable of. I smiled at her, a real smile this time, not the cold, calculated smile I'd perfected for business. I struggled for years, Mom, and look what I became. After my mother left, I sat alone in my office as the sun set over the city. I thought about the girl who'd walked out of that community college classroom 12 years earlier, angry and desperate, and absolutely determined to prove everyone wrong. She'd gotten everything she'd dreamed of and more. But somewhere along the way, she discovered something unexpected. The real victory wasn't in proving them wrong. The real victory was in proving herself right. I'd bet on myself when no one else would, and I'd won. I'd built something extraordinary from nothing, turned pain into power, and transformed rejection into resilience. The girl who'd been told she'd never amount to anything had become the CEO of a multi-million-dollar company. The family failure had become the family success story. But more than that, I'd become someone who knew her own worth, not because others recognized it, but because I'd created it myself, brick by brick, decision by decision, success by success. And that was something no one could ever take away from me. Rate this story 110 and tell me, what's the biggest dream you've been told to give up on? Sometimes the people who doubt us the most are just afraid of what we might become. Don't let anyone else define your limits. You're the only one who gets to decide how far you'll go.